People may still see your gentleness and think you are the same person. They may still expect the old warmth, the old readiness, the old way you could enter a room and feel what everyone needed before anyone spoke. But something in you no longer rises to meet them. Something that once moved quickly, almost beautifully, toward pain has become quiet. You may still care, but the caring no longer becomes movement. You may still understand, but understanding no longer becomes sacrifice. And this is the part others may misread. They may call it tiredness, coldness, laziness, or withdrawal, because they cannot feel the shadow you have already met. After facing the shadow, the empath often does not feel newly powerful. They often feel emptied, not enlightened in the bright way the world imagines, not full of purpose, not inspired to build a new life overnight. More often, they sit inwardly in a chair that feels unfamiliar, as if the room of the psyche has been rearranged while they were grieving. The old motives are gone, but the new ones have not yet become trustworthy. The old self knew how to move. It knew how to please, rescue, sense, repair, soften, forgive, explain, and remain available. But once the shadow has been faced, the old self no longer feels innocent enough to continue. This can feel frightening because for so long your motivation was not simply desire, it was a response to pressure. It was the sound of someone needing you. It was the fear of being misunderstood. It was the quiet panic of disappointing someone. It was the invisible contract that said your worth increased when you could become useful, gentle, perceptive, and endlessly patient. You may have called this love, you may have called it kindness, you may have called it being spiritual, sensitive, mature, or emotionally aware. But through a Jungian lens, one might say much of it belonged to the persona, the beautiful face the psyche learned to wear so the deeper wound would not be exposed. And when the shadow is faced, that face begins to loosen, not because it was false in a simple way. It helped you live. It helped you belong somewhere, even if the belonging was conditional. It gave you a place at the table, even if the chair you occupied was too small for your soul. It allowed others to feel safe around you, because you carried what they did not want to carry. You could feel tension before it became conflict. You could sense sadness before it asked for comfort. You could adjust yourself before anyone had to confront themselves. There was intelligence in this. There was tenderness in it too. But there was also a cost that the body and the soul did not forget. The moment you truly face the shadow, you begin to see that your goodness was never just goodness. It was mixed with fear. Your patience was never just patience. It was sometimes the terror of losing connection. Your sensitivity was never just sensitivity. It was also vigilance dressed in gentleness. This does not make the love you gave meaningless. It makes it more human. It places it back inside the whole truth of you, where light and shadow were always touching. And when that recognition comes, the psyche may refuse to keep moving under the old name of virtue. This is why the loss of motivation can feel so strange. You may look at your life and wonder why you cannot begin, why you cannot push yourself the way you used to, why the old plans feel distant, why the old goals no longer warm the blood. Why even beautiful things seem to ask for a part of you that is not available. You may sit with a cup in your hands, the phone nearby, the unread messages waiting, the chair beneath you holding the weight of a person who has not given up, but who can no longer pretend that motion is the same as life. The world often praises the empath when the empath is still useful. It loves the version of you that can sense, absorb, forgive, and return with open hands. It may not know what to do with the version of you that has finally seen the hidden bitterness beneath the endless giving. Not bitterness as cruelty, but bitterness as the soul's record of imbalance. The part of you that was never allowed to say, I am tired of knowing what everyone feels while no one asks what I carry. The part of you that smiled because it had learned that pain must be made beautiful before anyone would stay near it. Facing the shadow does not simply reveal what is dark. It reveals what was split off because it could not be loved. Your anger may return, not as an outburst, but as a quiet refusal. Your envy may appear, not because you are small, but because some unlived life in you has been watching others take up space without apology. Your resentment may surface, not to make you hard, but to show you where devotion became self-erasure. Your grief may deepen, because you begin to understand how much of your life was organized around not becoming too much. And after such recognition, motivation cannot remain the same. The old engine has been dismantled. This is not failure. It is not a moral collapse. It is the psyche refusing to be powered by fear once fear has been named. For years, perhaps decades, you moved because something in you believed stillness would cost you love. You answered quickly because silence felt like abandonment waiting to happen. You overextended because rest felt selfish. You became emotionally fluent because confusion in others felt unsafe. You became the one who understood because being understood yourself seemed too unlikely to ask for. But when the shadow rises, it brings back all the feelings that were exiled in order for the old role to remain beautiful. The empath, after facing the shadow, may discover an exhaustion that sleep does not touch. This is because the tiredness is not only physical. It belongs to the long labor of maintaining an identity that made other people comfortable. It belongs to the inner bending, the constant translation, the effort to be soft enough to be accepted and strong enough to be needed. The body may become heavy, not because life has lost all meaning, but because the psyche has withdrawn energy from the old performance. In Jungian terms, libido, the life energy, no longer flows toward the persona with the same devotion. It begins to gather somewhere deeper, somewhere still unnamed. That gathering can feel like emptiness. It can feel as if nothing matters. But sometimes what feels like nothing is the space left behind after compulsion has gone quiet. You are not yet moved by the self. You are no longer moved by the wound. You are between authorities. The old inner command has lost power, but the deeper voice has not yet become clear. This in-between place is difficult because the empath was often trained to recognize meaning only when someone else benefited from their presence. Without an external need, the inner world can feel blank. Without someone hurting, waiting, demanding, or silently pulling, you may not know what desire feels like when it belongs only to you. There may be shame in this, a private shame that whispers, why am I not grateful? Why am I not inspired? Why can I not just begin again? You may compare yourself to the old version of you and forget how much that version was carrying. The old version looked more alive because it was constantly activated. It had urgency. It had emotional assignments. It had people to read, moods to manage, wounds to soften, rooms to scan. But activation is not the same as aliveness. Sometimes the nervous brightness of the old self was not vitality. It was the flame of a candle held too close to a draft. Now, after the shadow, the flame lowers, the room darkens, you begin to see the chair, the wall, the quiet places you rushed past. You begin to notice how much silence exists when you are not translating yourself into what others need. And that silence may not feel peaceful at first. It may feel unbearable, because in the silence, you meet the one who was waiting beneath the empathic gift, the one who did not only want to understand others, the one who wanted to be met without performing emotional usefulness, the one who wanted to rest without earning rest, the one who wanted to exist without becoming medicine for every wound nearby. This is why motivation does not return by command. You cannot shame the psyche into the old movement after it has seen the cost. You cannot simply decide to become passionate again when passion was once tangled with fear. You cannot force purpose to arise from the same place where compliance used to live. Something deeper must reorganize. Something quieter must be trusted. But before that happens, there is often a long, tender aftermath where you feel almost like a stranger to yourself. You may look around and recognize your own life, yet feel no immediate impulse to participate in it the way you once did. In that aftermath, others may become confused. They may wonder why you no longer respond with the same speed. They may feel your distance before you explain it. They may sense that the familiar doorway into you has narrowed. And because they do not know the inner work that has taken place, they may interpret your stillness as rejection. But not every withdrawal is punishment. Sometimes withdrawal is the psyche taking back the energy it once spilled everywhere. Sometimes the empath goes quiet, not because love has disappeared, but because love is being separated from fear. And that separation takes more strength than the world can see. You may still feel guilty for needing less contact. You may still hear the old voice inside, asking whether you are becoming selfish, whether you are losing your softness, whether you are betraying the part of yourself that once cared so deeply. But perhaps the question is not whether you still care. Perhaps the question is whether your care can remain clean when it is no longer tied to self-abandonment. Perhaps the question is whether love can stay love when it no longer performs rescue. This is not an easy question. It reaches into the old wound. It asks whether you believe you can be loved without being necessary. For the empath, that question can ache more than loneliness, because being necessary may have been the closest thing to safety you knew. If you were needed, you had a place. If you were useful, you had a reason to remain. If you could feel what others denied, you possessed a strange kind of power in rooms where your own needs were too inconvenient. You learned the emotional weather before anyone named the storm. You became the quiet instrument through which the family, the partner, the friendship, or the room could regulate itself, and no one may have noticed that the instrument was a living soul. Facing the shadow means you begin to notice. You notice the anger under the kindness. You notice the loneliness under the understanding. You notice the hunger under the giving. You notice that some part of you has been sitting in that inner chair for years, waiting for your attention, while you kept leaving the room to tend to every other voice. The loss of motivation may be the first time that part of you has successfully stopped you, not to ruin your life, not to make you empty, but to keep you from abandoning it again. This is why the exhaustion feels sacred and inconvenient at the same time. It interrupts the old rhythm. It makes you unreliable to patterns that once depended on your immediate availability. It makes you slower. It makes you less impressed by urgency. It makes you question whether the thing asking for your energy is truly alive or merely familiar. And in that questioning, you may feel grief, because so much of what once gave you identity now feels like a costume hung over the back of a chair. You can still recognize it. You can still remember how to wear it, but something in you hesitates before putting it on. That hesitation is not nothing. It is the beginning of honesty. It is the place where the unconscious no longer allows the old story to pass unquestioned. You may not yet know what you want. You may not yet feel the pulse of a new life. You may not yet trust your own stillness, but you are beginning to know what no longer carries truth. And that knowledge can first arrive as heaviness, because the psyche often takes energy away from what is false before it gives energy to what is real. So if you have no motivation left after facing the shadow, it may not mean that your soul has gone silent. It may mean that your soul has stopped lending itself to the old arrangement. It may mean that the empath in you, the one who once reached for every wound, is being asked to sit down at last and feel the wound that made reaching feel necessary. It may mean that the chair you avoided has become the only honest place in the room, and though it feels like emptiness, something in you has finally stopped moving away from itself. And when you stop moving away from yourself, the first thing you may meet is not peace. It may be a kind of inner weather you spent your life trying to prevent, a heaviness without a clear name, a silence that does not comfort you yet, a strange reluctance to return messages, make plans, prove warmth, explain your distance, or step back into the familiar room where everyone knew who you were. You may sit in the same chair, in the same house, with the same cup in your hand, and feel that something has shifted beneath the ordinary surface of things. Nothing outside may look dramatic, but inwardly, the old agreement has been broken. The empath often learns motivation through relationship before they ever learn it through desire. You may have learned to move because someone was upset. You may have learned to act because someone was disappointed. You may have learned to become alert because someone's mood changed, someone's tone sharpened, someone's silence grew too heavy, someone's face closed. Your energy did not first belong to a dream. It belonged to an atmosphere. It belonged to the room. It belonged to the invisible changes in others that taught your body when to soften, when to disappear, when to explain, when to rescue, when to become useful before anyone had to ask. From a depth psychology perspective, this is where the complex begins to show itself. A complex is not merely a memory. It is a living knot of feeling, image, expectation, and old adaptation. It carries the past into the present without asking permission. It makes certain situations feel larger than they are. It turns a delayed reply into abandonment, a changed tone into danger, a disappointed face into inner emergency. a quiet room into a place where your whole nervous being begins to search for what went wrong. The adult may know that nothing terrible has happened, but the complex does not live by adult logic. It lives by emotional history. So when you say you have no motivation left, the deeper truth may be that the old complex is losing its command over your life. It may not be able to make you move as quickly as it once did. It may still whisper. It may still tighten something in the body. It may still make you feel guilty when you rest, uncertain when you do not respond, exposed when you choose yourself, but the command has weakened. The old voice says, get up, fix it, be gentle, make sure they are not upset with you. And another part of you remains seated, not because it does not hear, because it has begun to recognize the voice. Recognition changes everything. Before recognition, you may have mistaken the complex for conscience. You may have believed the guilt was proof that you were doing something wrong. You may have believed the inner pressure to help was proof of love. You may have believed exhaustion was simply the price of being sensitive. But after facing the shadow, you begin to hear the difference between true care and old fear. They can sound almost identical at first. Both may use the language of kindness. Both may move toward another person's pain. Both may make you attentive, patient, forgiving, and gentle. But one comes from the living heart. The other comes from the old wound trying to secure its place. This is why the loss of motivation can feel like a loss of identity. You are not only losing energy, you are losing the old reason you were allowed to exist. That may sound severe, but the psyche often builds its earliest sense of worth around the role that receives the least punishment. If being easy brought peace, you became easy. If sensing others protected you from shock, you became perceptive. If carrying the family's unspoken sadness gave you a place, you became the emotional container. If needing nothing kept you safe from rejection, you became someone who asked for very little. The role was not chosen in the simple way an adult chooses a path. It formed around you like a second skin. And a second skin is not removed without pain. Even when it suffocates, it has warmth. Even when it limits, it has familiarity. Even when it costs the soul, it gives the psyche something to recognize in the mirror. This is why part of you may miss the old motivation. Even after seeing what it cost, there was clarity in the old role. Someone needed something, and you knew who to become. Someone was hurting, and your purpose appeared. Someone was distant, and your emotional intelligence became the bridge. Someone was unsettled, and your sensitivity found work. The old self may have suffered, but it rarely had to face the open question of what it wanted. Now that question stands quietly in the room. It does not shout. It waits. And because you were trained to respond to external need before inner desire, the question may feel almost empty. What do you want? When no one is pulling on you, what moves you? When no one is disappointed, what is alive in you? When you are not making yourself meaningful through another person's relief? These questions may not feel inspiring. They may feel blank, even cruel, not because you lack depth, but because your desire has lived so long behind the persona that it has forgotten how to step forward without fear. In Jungian terms, the persona is not a lie. It is the face we develop to meet the world. It helps us belong, communicate, and take a place among others. But when the persona becomes too fused with the wounded role, the person begins to disappear inside the adaptation. The empathic persona can be especially beautiful. It can appear generous, wise, emotionally available, forgiving, intuitive, and warm. It can become the face everyone trusts. But behind it, the shadow waits with everything the persona could not allow. Anger waits. Need waits? No waits. Weariness waits. The desire to be left alone waits. The wish to stop being the one who understands waits. When the shadow finally enters awareness, it does not politely arrange itself into acceptable feelings. It may arrive as numbness, it may arrive as disgust toward old obligations, it may arrive as irritation at people you still love, it may arrive as a sudden inability to listen to the same stories, absorb the same pain, or offer the same gentle explanations. It may arrive as the quiet thought, I cannot do this anymore, even though nothing obvious has changed. And because the empathic persona has often been built around kindness, these feelings can feel like a betrayal of the self you believed you were. But the shadow is not the enemy of your kindness. It is the keeper of the parts of you that kindness had to exclude. If your gentleness required the burial of anger, the shadow kept the anger. If your patience required the burial of truth, the shadow kept the truth. If your forgiveness required the burial of self-respect, the shadow kept the self-respect. If your sensitivity required the burial of boundaries, the shadow kept the boundary as an ache. And when those buried parts begin to return, motivation may fall away, because the old inner system can no longer organize you around one acceptable image. This is why the aftermath can feel morally confusing. You may not know whether you are becoming more honest or less loving. You may not know whether the distance you feel is wisdom or exhaustion. You may not know whether the heaviness is grief or refusal. You may not know whether the silence is protection or truth. The old role gave you a clean answer. Be kind, be available, understand, forgive, stay open. But the deeper psyche does not move in slogans. It moves in symbols, conflicts, dreams, bodily hesitations, and sudden withdrawals of energy. It often tells the truth first by making the false movement impossible. Perhaps this is why the chair keeps appearing inwardly. The chair is not dramatic. It is not a battlefield. It is just a place where you stop. But for someone who has lived by emotional motion, sitting still can be a revolution of the soul. To remain in the chair while the old guilt calls your name. To feel the pull of someone else's need and not immediately abandon your own center. To let the phone remain unanswered while something in you learns that silence is not the same as cruelty. To stay with the discomfort of not being useful. These are not techniques. They are the first unbearable shapes of a different life. The unconscious may resist this change because the old role was not only painful, it was also protective. It kept you from the terror of being unnecessary. It kept you from the grief of discovering who did not come close when you stopped giving. It kept you from the emptiness of your own unlived life. It kept you from the anger that might rise if you admitted how one-sided some bonds had become. It kept you from the sorrow of seeing that your empathy had sometimes been welcomed not because you were loved deeply, but because you were convenient to the emotional economy of others. That is a hard truth, and it needs tenderness around it, because you did not become convenient because you were foolish. You became that way because the psyche looked for belonging wherever belonging could be found. The child within the adult often accepts roles the soul never would have chosen freely. If being good meant less conflict, goodness became shelter. If being understanding meant less abandonment, understanding became shelter. If being needed meant not being forgotten, being needed became shelter. The wound did not only hurt you, it taught you where warmth could be found, even when the warmth came with hidden conditions. So the old motivation was never simple. It may have contained real love, real compassion, real spiritual instinct, and real capacity to see others deeply, but it also contained the old bargain, the hope that if you could become sensitive enough, generous enough, patient enough, then perhaps you would finally be held with the same care you gave away. This hope may have lived so quietly beneath your life that you never called it hope. It simply became your way of being. You entered relationships as one who listened. You entered conflict as one who softened. You entered pain as one who could bear it. Somewhere inside, the psyche waited to see whether anyone would notice the cost. Facing the shadow means noticing the cost yourself. And once you notice it, you cannot fully return to the innocence of the old giving. This does not mean you stop loving. It means love can no longer remain unconscious in the same way. It must pass through truth. It must survive the presence of anger. It must make room for your own limits. It must stop using your disappearance as proof of devotion. This is why the old motivation fades. It was tied to a version of love that required you to stay divided. One part giving, one part hidden, one part smiling, one part resentful, one part understanding, one part aching to be understood. The loss of motivation may therefore be the psyche's refusal to remain divided. It is not yet joy. It is not yet clarity. It is not yet a new life. It is a withdrawal of energy from the split. The psyche says, no more movement from the half-self, no more warmth that secretly freezes the body, no more forgiveness that leaves the truth outside the door, no more listening while the inner child sits unseen in the corner, no more becoming light for rooms that never ask why you live in such darkness afterward. This can make daily life feel strangely dull. Tasks that once gave you a sense of purpose may feel mechanical. Conversations may feel repetitive. Even helping may feel heavy, as if each act carries the weight of all the times you helped while abandoning yourself. You may wonder whether something has gone wrong inside you, but from the language of the unconscious, this dullness can be meaningful. The old symbols have lost their charge. The old roles have lost their glow. The psychic energy is no longer flowing toward the images that once organized your identity. Something has gone quiet because it is waiting for a truer image. That truer image rarely arrives quickly. It may first appear as a refusal, a closed door, a body that will not get up, a sudden weariness when someone begins to speak in the old way, a feeling of being far away from conversations that once captured your whole being, a strange calm where panic used to live. Even your compassion may feel different, less immediate, less theatrical, less fused. You may sense another person's pain and still remain inside your own skin. At first, this may feel like a loss of your gift, but perhaps the gift is not leaving. Perhaps it is being separated from the wound that made it compulsive. There is a form of empathy that comes from union with another person's pain. and there is a form that comes from remaining whole while witnessing it. The first may feel intense, intimate, even sacred, but it can erase the border between your life and theirs. The second may feel quieter, less dramatic, and at first less familiar, but it allows you to stay present without becoming consumed. After facing the shadow, the psyche may be moving you from the first form toward the second. And because the first form once gave you identity, the transition may feel like emotional death before it feels like maturity. The old part of you may say, if I am not absorbed, I do not care. If I am not needed, I do not matter. If I do not feel their pain inside my body, I am becoming cold. But these are the beliefs of the wound, not the final truth of the soul. The soul can witness without drowning. It can love without merging. It can understand without surrendering its own center. Yet knowing this intellectually is not the same as living it. The body must learn it slowly. The inner child must see, again and again, that connection does not require disappearance. And during that learning, motivation may remain low because the old fuel has been taken away, and the new fire is still small. This small fire must not be rushed. It is not the bright flame of proving, rescuing, pleasing, or being admired for your depth. It may begin as the smallest warmth towards something that belongs only to you. A quiet morning, a page, a walk, a room arranged differently, a meal eaten without checking who needs you, a boundary held without explaining it into softness. These may not feel like motivation in the old sense. They may not make you feel heroic or useful. But they may be the first signs that energy is returning to the center rather than leaking outward into every open wound around you. Still, there will be grief, because the old role was not merely a role, it carried your history. It carried your image of yourself as good. It carried the faces of people you loved. It carried the hope that your gentleness would one day be returned with equal tenderness. To loosen that role is to grieve not only what happened, but what did not happen, the apology that never came, the recognition that arrived too late or not at all, the childhood rest that was never offered, the adult relationships where you were valued most when you were easiest to need, the years spent standing at the doorway of your own life, listening for someone else's pain before entering your own room. No wonder you are tired. No wonder the old goals do not shine in the same way. No wonder motivation feels absent when so much of what once moved you was tied to being chosen by need. The psyche is not lazy. It is mourning. It is sorting the living from the dead. It is asking which desires are truly yours and which were shaped around absence. It is asking which forms of care come from love and which come from fear. It is asking whether the empath can remain tender without becoming the chair everyone sits on when they do not want to stand inside their own sorrow. And perhaps, beneath all this, the deeper movement is not toward having motivation again, at least not in the old sense. Perhaps the deeper movement is toward no longer needing pain to give you direction. That is a strange freedom, and at first it feels like emptiness. If no one needs you urgently, who are you? If no one is upset with you, what do you do with your day? If no wound is calling your name, where does your attention go? These questions may open a wide inner silence, but the silence is not necessarily absence. It may be the first space in which the self can speak without being interrupted by the old emergency. The self does not usually shout over the complex. It waits underneath it, It waits beneath the rescuer, beneath the gentle one, beneath the exhausted one, beneath the one who knew too much too early. It waits in the place you kept leaving. And now, because the old motivation has collapsed, you may finally be near enough to hear something quieter. Not a command, not a grand purpose, not a dramatic revelation, perhaps only a faint sense that you are allowed to remain in the room without performing your usefulness. Perhaps only the feeling that the chair beneath you is not a punishment, but a place where the scattered life begins to return. So when the world asks why you are not moving, it may not understand that something inward is moving with great seriousness. The old persona is loosening, the complex is losing authority, the shadow is returning the exiled parts. The energy once spent on managing emotional weather is being gathered back into the unknown center. None of this looks impressive from the outside. It may look like stillness, delay, distance, or lack of ambition, but inside, a deeper reordering has begun. And the old self cannot be forced back into command simply because others miss how available you used to be. You are not standing at the end of your life. You are standing at the end of an old arrangement. That arrangement had warmth in it, and pain in it, and meaning in it, and fear in it. It helped you remain connected when connection felt uncertain. It gave your sensitivity a place to go. It made you valuable in rooms that did not know how to value your being without your service. But now the psyche has begun to withdraw its loyalty from that arrangement. And for a while, this withdrawal may feel like having no motivation at all. Yet beneath the heaviness, something has become more honest. You may not feel ready, you may not feel inspired, you may not feel alive in the way you hoped facing the shadow would make you feel alive. But you are closer to yourself than you were when you were rushing toward everyone else. The quiet may still hurt, the chair may still feel unfamiliar, the old guilt may still call from the doorway, but something in you has stopped mistaking the call for truth. And that is why the old life no longer moves you the same way. And when the old life no longer moves you the same way, you may begin to feel a private shame that is difficult to confess. Not the shame of having done something wrong, but the shame of no longer being able to become who others still expect you to be. The shame of watching yourself pause when you used to rush. The shame of feeling nothing where urgency once rose. The shame of hearing someone's need and sensing beneath your care. A quiet resistance that says, not again, not in the old way. You may wonder what has happened to your heart, because the heart you knew was always in motion. But the heart that is always in motion may not always be free. Sometimes it is running from an old emptiness. Sometimes it is trying to outrun the memory of not being chosen unless it was useful. Sometimes it keeps pouring itself outward, because inwardness feels like a room where no one ever came looking. And when the shadow has been faced, the psyche may bring you into that room, not as punishment, but as truth. It may place you in the chair you avoided. It may let the silence widen until you can no longer confuse movement with meaning. This is where the deeper shadow appears, not as something ugly, but as something painfully human. The old role did not only take from you, it also paid you. It paid you in belonging, in identity, in relief from the fear of being unnecessary. It paid you in the feeling that you had a place whenever someone was wounded, lost, confused, angry, lonely, or unable to carry themselves. It paid you in the quiet authority of being the one who could read the room. It paid you in a kind of moral safety, because if you were always helping, always understanding, always forgiving, then you did not have to face the more frightening question of what you wanted when no one needed you. This is a tender truth, and it must be held gently. It is not an accusation. It is not a verdict against your kindness. It is the shadow entering the room with the part of the story that was too difficult to admit while you were still trying to be good. You may have been wounded by being used, but you may also have found shelter in being needed. You may have resented carrying others, but you may also have feared what would happen if you stopped carrying them and discovered how little they knew how to meet you. You may have longed for freedom, but freedom may also have frightened you because it would remove the old proof that you mattered. The role paid you in a currency you could not refuse, not because you were weak, but because some younger part of you had once learned that being needed was safer than being known. To be known was uncertain. To be known meant your anger might be seen, your limits might disappoint, your desire might inconvenience, your sadness might be too heavy, your truth might disturb the room, but to be needed was clearer. Need gave you a function. Need gave you entry. Need made your presence useful before anyone had to decide whether your presence alone was welcome. So the empathic role became both wound and shelter. It hurt you, but it also protected you from a deeper exposure. It allowed you to give without asking. It allowed you to remain close without risking the full truth of your own need. It allowed you to feel important while staying hidden. In Jungian terms, the persona and the shadow formed an old alliance. The persona said, "I am the gentle one." The shadow quietly carried the anger, the hunger, the fatigue, the wish to leave, the wish to be chosen without service. The persona received love for being warm. The shadow kept the record of every time warmth cost too much. After facing the shadow, this alliance begins to break, and when it breaks, you may feel less motivated because you can no longer receive the same payment without feeling the hidden price. Someone may need you, and the old part of you may still recognize the shape of the role, but another part now sees the exchange too clearly. It sees how quickly your energy leaves your body. It sees how familiar the ache becomes. It sees how your own life steps backward when another person's unresolved pain enters the room. It sees the chair waiting for you, and it knows you have left that chair too many times. This seeing can feel like coldness at first. You may think, "I should want to help. I should want to listen. I should feel moved." But perhaps what has gone cold is not your love. Perhaps what has gone cold is the old bargain. The part of you that once warmed itself by being necessary can no longer create heat from self-abandonment. The flame has changed. It no longer rises when someone else's wound calls your name. It waits for something cleaner, something less frantic, something that does not require you to vanish in order to feel connected. This is why part of you may feel empty after the shadow is faced. A source of identity has been removed, and the psyche has not yet fully replaced it with living desire. The old empathic self knew who it was through response. It was summoned by need. It became vivid in crisis. It felt valuable in the presence of sorrow. It could enter the emotional darkness of others and find purpose there. But now, when the shadow has returned anger, and truth to consciousness. The old summons no longer feels sacred in the same way. It feels familiar, and familiarity is no longer enough. There may be moments when you miss the clarity of the old suffering. This is another shadow truth, and it can be difficult to admit. When you were overextended, at least you knew why you were tired. When someone needed you, at least you knew where to place your energy. When you were rescuing, explaining, absorbing, forgiving, or waiting, your life had a shape. Even if the shape was painful, now the pain may be quieter, more open, less organized. You are not being pulled as strongly, but you may not yet know how to move without being pulled. You are freer than before, and yet the freedom may feel like a hallway with too many closed doors. One might say, in Jungian terms, that the psyche is withdrawing projection from the role. The role once seemed to contain your goodness, your purpose, your worth, even your spiritual meaning. It seemed to say, this is who you are. But now, the unconscious has begun to take back what was projected onto that image. You are not only the helper, you are not only the listener, you are not only the one who understands, you are not only the quiet warmth in the room, you are also the one who is tired, the one who is angry, the one who has needs, the one who sometimes does not want to know what anyone else feels, the one whose life has waited behind the life of service. To meet that whole truth is to grieve the simplicity of the old identity. A divided life can be painful, but it can also feel simple, because one side is allowed to speak and the other is buried. Wholeness is more complicated. Wholeness asks you to carry love and refusal in the same body. It asks you to let kindness remain, but no longer let kindness erase the rest of you. It asks you to feel compassion without offering yourself as the price. It asks you to stop treating your own limits as interruptions to your goodness. And until this new arrangement becomes familiar, motivation may remain low because the psyche refuses to move from division, yet does not fully know how to move from wholeness. This is the deeper truth beneath the exhaustion. You are not merely tired from giving. You are tired from maintaining innocence around giving. You are tired from pretending you did not know when something was one-sided. You are tired from softening what hurt you so the bond could remain beautiful. You are tired from translating your resentment into understanding before it had a chance to become information. You are tired from making your own disappointment more acceptable than it really was. And now the shadow has interrupted the translation. Perhaps this is why small demands can feel enormous. A simple message can feel like a hand reaching toward an old self that no longer lives in the same way. A familiar request can stir not only the present moment, but every moment when you answered against yourself. A disappointed tone can awaken the whole history of trying not to lose love. And even when you know the current situation is not as heavy as the past, the body may still hesitate. The body remembers the pattern before the mind finishes explaining it. It knows the path from one small yes to another season of disappearance. So the body becomes quieter, heavier, less willing. It may not offer dramatic signs. It may simply remove its cooperation. The mouth may not find the old words. The hand may not reach for the phone. The body may remain in the chair a few seconds longer than the old role allows. This pause can feel like failure if you still measure yourself by responsiveness. But in the language of the unconscious, the pause is meaningful. It is the body asking whether the old door must be opened again, or whether this time you can remain with yourself